Hey guys, welcome back. Man, okay. Marvel Legacy, Donny Cates, Venom, and now Carnage born. And so now we're just gonna hop right into this talk because I'm pretty much assuming that everybody at this point knows who Carnage is. And prior to this point, it was pretty simple because originally, in a nutshell, Spider-Man brought back the symbiote from Secret Wars, in the first Secret Wars that is, back in 1984. But he got the symbiote, he wore it for a little while, he noticed himself being a bit more brutal and aggressive with it, so he got rid of it, and from there the symbiote bonded with Eddie Brock, who became Venom, and together they hated Spider-Man and Peter Parker. But eventually this would change throughout the years through a number of writers, and the two of these guys having gone through so much, and this symbiote having a number of different hosts, and even at one point the symbiote wanting to go back to Peter Parker, but overall having its closest bond with Eddie Brock. But before all that, at one point in time, Eddie Brock had shared a prison cell with Cletus Kasady, who from what we knew originally was just a mad, crazy serial killer. And I mean mad crazy, like man, woman, or child, didn't care. And we even learned much later on, like in Carnage Volume 2, that part of Carnage's personal hate for Eddie Brock came about when there were inmates in Rikers Island and Eddie Brock, who was separated from his symbiote at the time, because you know, if he was Venom at the time, we ain't going to jail. But during the time that there were cellmates, Eddie Brock was disgusted at Cletus Kasady's view of the world. And writer Jerry Conway later showed us in Volume 2 that Eddie Brock would beat up Cletus Kasady a number of times in prison because of that. But upon the time that they had broke out of prison, when the symbiote was returned to Eddie Brock, a piece of it broke off, and that piece that broke off merged with Cletus Kasady, and it's at that point that he became Carnage. But what we come to find out in Carnage Born is that there is so much more. And like I've been saying with the Marvel Legacy one-shot in our talks on Thanos Wins and Black Panther, most of what they're doing is keeping the old but adding a few little new things. And one of those things being, at the time that Cletus Kasady was born, 19 minutes and 38 seconds after, he had stopped breathing because he was born choking on his umbilical cord. But not too long after, when he came back to life, no one knew how, and when his mother being in the insane asylum, nobody really cared, sadly. But when Cletus came back, even to this day, he still remembers that first thought of dying and entered the endless black abyss. And after, he was mysteriously brought back to life. But because of what we know, and oh man, this is getting good. But because of what we know about the origin of Knull and the Abyss, and also that symbol of the Abyss, which is the symbol of Knull, that appeared in the eyes of Cletus Kasady as a child when he was reborn from his first death, but all of this happened at his birth before he got the symbiote. And I'm sure many people, their minds are wondering and like, well, that's kind of random. Why when he dies does he go to Knull? Why does he go to the Abyss when others, they may go to either Hell or Valhalla? But I'm gonna step out on a whim and say that there's a blood relation between Knull and Cletus Kasady that caused this to happen, and that's why at the time of Cletus Kasady's death, he went to the Abyss. But we'll get more into that in just a little bit. But if you're new here and you need to know more about Knull, I got links in the description that'll catch you up, because he's the god of the symbiotes, creator of the Necro Sword, Celestial Slayer. The guy is just amazing. But like I mentioned, when Cletus Kasady returned, he remembered the Abyss. And from his description to court-appointed psychiatrist, he described it as hell with 2 L's and not one like the realm of the dead. But even going further, Donny Cates lets us know that when he came back, or even as a child, as a baby, he felt like he was wrapped into a prison. And after his knowledge or revelation of the Abyss, all his life he has seen people this way, like they were locked in this cage of flesh, and whenever he would kill someone, it was like he was setting them free. And I just want to go on the record saying that doesn't make it okay either. But it does add on to a deeper explanation of why he does it, instead of just telling us that he thinks it's fun. But Cates also goes on to show us during Kasady's time in prison, at the time that Eddie escaped and left a part of the symbiote behind, when Cletus Kasady merged with it, for him it was like a moment of his purpose being fulfilled. And in this case, with him having a cut on his hand, which is a callback to him feeling like everyone born of flesh is born into this world trapped into the prison of their body. But it's here when he became Carnage that his blood and the symbiote reached out to each other, creating the perfect bond together with both blood and symbiote, further showing us that he was chosen by the darkness so that the worshippers of Knull can be reunited with their god forever and together in the void. And this cult, if you will, it's pretty much a cult. But their plan is pretty much to bring Cletus Kasady back to life, whom was chosen from birth and has witnessed the Abyss without a symbiote, but to bring him back to fulfill his purpose, which as they say is joining the Black King in the final night. And so now the leader of this group is Thanos Venomized, also known as Scorn. And so now Scorn, she also predates Marvel Legacy. She was originally a psychiatrist who was assigned to Shriek, and she knows a bit about the history of Cletus Kasady, first because she briefly wore the Carnage symbiote, which led her back to Cletus Kasady so it could return to him. But the remains of the symbiote that began to grow from her prosthetic arm, it was initially discarded where it went to Shriek, but with Shriek having an ultrasonic scream, that really didn't work out, so then it returned to Thanos, and then they became Scorn. And when we see this, Carnage Born is really pulling a lot from Carnage Volume 1 and Volume 2, and so when you take those stories and her history with the Carnage symbiote, and then you put that into perspective with the recent appearance of Knull, who had sent his avatar to Earth to reclaim his children, it makes sense that she would be the one to put all of this together, and to do so by getting her hands on the body of Cletus Kasady and combining it with a sample from Knull's dragon that was left behind and using that to bring Kasady back, which is wild, but it makes sense. And so now we've talked about before how Cletus Kasady got to this point and how he died back towards the conclusion of Venomized, and there's a couple of videos, rather a few videos, where I go much more into depth about that, and I got all those links down in the description, because along the lines of a number of different events going on alongside with Venomized and Monsters Unleashed, I talked a bit about how these events unfolded in the Thanos Venomized video, which does include a bit of narrative from alternate realities. But even after the conclusion of Venomized, as we went into further talks about characters like James Hudson, we then began to have the discussion to why certain characters still had symbiotes even after the hive was destroyed. And I feel like we're getting closer to those answers in Carnage Born, because with us seeing James Hudson still with a symbiote, this is a pretty huge detail going into this series. But with the conclusion of Venomized also casting Carnage, like the real Carnage, who was part poison throughout that series, but with it leaving him alive at the end of Venomized, Carnage Born picks up right there, and it fills in the gap, telling us what happens after that event concluded and the hive was destroyed, and how he was pretty much left to die in space and really forgotten about for a while at the conclusion of that series. But with him crashing through the atmosphere and burning on the way down, he survived this. And though the symbiotes are usually vulnerable to fire and high-pitched sounds, this is different for Carnage, mainly because of what took place in Carnage Volume 2 after the Darkhold curse gave him immunity to both. And so when this happened, and it's crazy because it all predates Marvel Legacy, but when this happened, Carnage was used as the Red Slayer, to whom when he spills blood on the sacred stone, he who sleeps so he could walk again. And so initially this was set to awaken elder gods like Thawne and the others from his pantheon, which were like Gaia, Othshur, and Set, and I'm pretty sure those are the other names. But with these Darkholders sacrificing Carnage, this didn't actually go as planned, but instead gave him some of the old god's power. But eventually Thawne was defeated by Carnage, the raised symbiote, and Toxin, to where Thawne was banished once again. But when Scorn explains Carnage surviving falling through the atmosphere and not being completely incinerated, she points back to that curse and that prophecy allowing this to be possible. But even still, upon re-entry, he died again, or so it seems, because him and the Carnage symbiote, with them being both bonded blood and symbiote, and this now meaning that from day one that Carnage has been the symbiote and vice versa through and through, I can't help but to think or tie this back to Knull, because the same way when he had that battle in space and he crashed on the same planet as Gorr the God Butcher, or more so that desolate planet before he became Gorr the God Butcher, but when this happened to Knull and he had the Necro Sword taken from him, he was left there for a long period of time, not dead, but in a sleep state rather. And it was but a matter of time later that he had awoken and he began to experiment and learn through his new creations the birth of the symbiotes by bonding his symbiote spawns to the life that was on that planet. But as for Kasady, who landed here on Earth, he was found by some localers who turned his body into the authorities, and it was from there that he was stolen by Scorn and the others, who took him and also stole that sample from the Grendel symbiote, which was the huge dragon that Noah was navigating all the way from Clintar. But they take this sample and they put it with the body of Cletus Kasady, and it brings him back to life. And for a moment he's connected back to Knull, much like that sample which was an avatar for Knull, which quickens Carnage and reconnects him to Knull, who seemingly tries to take control over the body of Cletus Kasady, but it doesn't work. And when Kasady gains full consciousness, but in order for him to be fully restored, he has to get the remaining symbiote or codex that remains in the body of Scorn, which they originally planned to do with the Maker's research, who are going to use that research to remove her symbiote and the same with others. Like we talked about before, anyone who's been merged with the symbiote still has traces of that symbiote after, much like how the symbiote after it leaves, it has traces of them, mainly in the form of memories. But as for the host or the body that still has a portion of the symbiote, this portion is called the codex. and it's a careful procedure that the maker designed on removing it, which I believe he put together around the time he had Eddie Brock in captivity. But with Scorn now in the possession of the maker's research, she wants to use it to restore Carnage. But Carnage here, he ain't waiting. He just sees it like, okay, Scorn, you here, I'm here, and he pretty much just rips her spine out and just eats it, rebonding his offspring, the Scorn symbiote, to himself. But as he goes on to treat these different followers as an all-you-can-eat buffet, the more he eats, the more he gets his red color, and this new Carnage just swole out this world. He's huge. But it gets a bit trippy here, because when Carnage comes back and he's being restored, and he's like eating all these people, he starts to talk about the footage from the film that Scorn has showed him. And he's a film critic, so he says it was a bit over dramatic, but it's also here that he corrects them, saying that he was the hands choking the young Cletus Kasady. And even further than that, he wants to talk to that god again, referring to Knull. And when he asked one of the guys, how does he do this? How does he get back in contact with Knull? They tell him he has to retrieve back every codex from everyone who has had a symbiote ever. That's a long list, man. And as messed up as it is, I kind of want to see him go through this, like go through every last one of these people. Not that I want to see them go, but it's Carnage, man. It's been a minute. And I feel terrible for saying that, but I just know it's going to be so good. But with this going down, and man, I kind of wish I did that Return of Flash Thompson video now. But by the time this video goes up, I'll be out of town, and we can get into it more later in the week when I get back. But a few things that this brings to mind off top is, one, Venom killed Scorpion, who was once Venom, and things like with James Hudson still having a symbiote, this kind of tells us where Marvel's going with that. Because at first I was kind of like, it's over, man, like why do you still have that? But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. What are your thoughts and theories of this godlike Carnage pretty much eating the Marvel universe? Because I'll say, in my opinion, with everything else that's going on with the War of Realms and Loki kind of hinting to the Avengers that they were being watched, I truly believe that Loki was talking about more than just the Watchers, more than just the Maker. I think it was a lot more going on there. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.